The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. All eyes were on the judge, a stern figure with a reputation for being unyielding, even harsh. His voice echoed through the room as he leaned forward, peering down at the young man standing before him. The teenager, barely 18, looked out of place in his ill-fitting suit and scuffed shoes. His face was calm, almost too calm, as if he were hiding something behind those steady eyes. The judge smirked, a condescending twist of his lips, and said, "Son, do you even understand the gravity of the situation you're in? Or are you just here to waste everyone's time?" The gallery chuckled softly, but the boy didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his glasses and replied, "Your Honor, I assure you, I understand perfectly." What no one in that room knew, not the judge, not the lawyers, not even the bailiff, was that this seemingly ordinary teenager was anything but ordinary. In fact, he was about to turn the entire courtroom upside down. The case itself was nothing extraordinary, a minor traffic violation that had escalated into a legal battle. But the boy, whose name was Alex Carter, had a secret. He wasn't just a high school student with a knack for arguing. He was a prodigy, a legal savant who had been studying law since he was 12. While other kids were playing video games or hanging out at the mall, Alex was poring over law books, memorizing case, precedents, and even drafting mock legal briefs. He had a mind like a steel trap, sharp and unrelenting, and he had been waiting for the right moment to put it to the test. That moment had arrived, though no one in the courtroom had any idea what was coming. The judge, a man named Harold Grayson, was known for his no-nonsense attitude and his tendency to belittle those he deemed unworthy of his time. He had seen countless defendants come and go, and to him, Alex was just another kid in over his head. "Listen, young man," Judge Grayson said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Unless you've got a law degree hidden in that backpack of yours, I suggest you sit down and let the adults handle this." The gallery erupted in laughter again, but Alex remained unfazed. He reached into his bag and pulled out a thick folder, placing it on the table with a deliberate thud. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady and confident. "I may not have a law degree, but I do have something far more valuable, the truth." The room fell silent once more, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Even Judge Grayson seemed momentarily taken aback. He narrowed his eyes, studying the boy with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "And what, pray tell, is this truth you speak of?" he asked, his tone less mocking now, more cautious. Alex opened the folder and began to speak, his words flowing like a river, precise and unrelenting. He cited case law, pointed out procedural errors, and even referenced a little-known statute that completely undermined the prosecution's argument. The lawyers on both sides exchanged uneasy glances, and the judge's expression shifted from skepticism to outright shock. By the time Alex finished, the courtroom was in stunned silence. Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But before Alex could answer, the prosecutor, a seasoned attorney named Margaret Hayes, stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," she exclaimed. This child has no right to address the court in this manner." Judge Grayson held up a hand to silence her, his eyes never leaving Alex. "I'll decide what's irregular. My courtroom, Ms. Hayes," he said sharply. Then turning back to Alex, he added, "I'll ask you again, who are you?" Alex smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent a shiver down the spines of everyone in the room. "Your Honor," he said, "I'm the attorney for the defense." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and for a moment no one moved. The judge's jaw dropped, the prosecutor's face turned pale, and even the bailiff looked like he'd seen a ghost. How could this teenager, this kid who looked like he should be sitting in a high school classroom, possibly be an attorney? And yet there he was, standing tall and confident, his eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. The tension in the room was palpable, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Judge Grayson leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You'd better start explaining yourself, young man," he said, "and you'd better do it fast." But before Alex could respond, the door at the back of the courtroom burst open, and a man in a dark suit rushed in, his face flushed and his breathing ragged. He scanned the room quickly, his eyes landing on Alex. "There you are," he exclaimed, his voice a mixture of relief and frustration. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as everyone tried to make sense of what was happening. Judge Grayson slammed his gavel down, the sharp crack echoing through the room. "Order! Order in the court!" he bellowed, but the damage was done. The tension had reached its breaking point, and the truth, whatever it was about to come crashing down like a tidal wave. As the man in the dark suit approached the bench, Alex turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "I was just about to explain everything," he said calmly. But before he could continue, Judge Grayson interrupted, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Explain? You'd better do more than explain, young man. You'd better have a damn good reason for this. This charade." The man in the suit stepped forward, holding up a hand to silence the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady but urgent, "there's more to this situation than you realize. Much more." The room fell silent once again, all eyes fixed on the man as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, official-looking badge. He held it up for everyone to see, and the color drained from Judge Grayson's face. "My name is Agent Mark Harris," the man said, "and I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words hit the room like a bombshell, and the tension skyrocketed to a whole new level. What was the FBI doing here? What did they want with Alex? And most importantly, what did this mean for the case, and for everyone involved? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the room teetered on the edge of chaos. Alex stood quietly, his face calm but his mind racing. He had known this moment would come, but he hadn't expected it to happen like this. He glanced at Judge Grayson, then at the prosecutor, and finally at Agent Harris. "I think it's time I told you the whole story," he said, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of urgency. "But I warn you, once you hear it, there's no going back." And with that, the room fell into a silence so deep it felt like the world itself had stopped turning. Everyone waited, their hearts pounding, as Alex took a deep breath and began to speak. But what he said next would change everything, not just for him, but for everyone in that courtroom. The truth was about to come out, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. But for now, the story hangs in the balance, teetering, on the edge of revelation, as the tension builds and the stakes grow higher. What happens next? Well, that's a story for another time. Alex's voice was calm, but there was a weight to his words that made the entire courtroom lean in, hanging on every syllable. "This isn't just about a traffic violation," he began, his eyes scanning the room. "This is about something much bigger. Something that goes beyond this courtroom, beyond this town. And it starts with me." He paused, letting the words sink in. Judge Grayson, still visibly shaken by the sudden appearance of the FBI agent, leaned forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by a wary curiosity. "Go on," he said, his voice tight. "But I swear, if this is some kind of stunt, you'll regret it." Alex nodded, his expression serious. "I understand, Your Honor, but this is no stunt. It's a matter of justice and survival." He turned to Agent Harris, who gave him a slight nod, as if granting him permission to continue. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Even the prosecutor, Margaret Hayes, who had been so quick to dismiss Alex earlier, now sat frozen, her pen hovering above her legal pad. "My name is Alex Carter," he began again. "But that's not the name I was born with. I've been living under an assumed identity for the past 2 years, ever since my parents were killed in a car accident." He paused, his voice catching slightly, but he quickly composed himself. Only, it wasn't an accident. It was staged to look like one, but the truth is they were murdered, and the people who killed them are still out there. The room erupted into murmurs, but Judge Grayson slammed his gavel down, silencing the crowd. "Quiet," he barked. Then, turning, "Back to Alex," he said. "You're saying your parents were murdered? And you've been hiding ever since?" Alex nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, my parents were investigative journalists. They were working on a story, a big story, about corruption at the highest levels of government. They had evidence, documents, names, but before they could publish it, they were silenced, and I was left with nothing but their research and a target on my back." Agent Harris stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "What Alex is saying is true," he said, his voice firm. "His parents' deaths were no accident. They were assassinated to keep them from exposing a conspiracy that reaches far beyond what any of you can imagine. Alex has been in protective custody ever since, but he's not just a victim. He's a key witness, and now he's decided to take matters into his own hands." The room was in shock. Judge Grayson's face was a mixture of disbelief and concern, while Margaret Hayes looked like she was trying to process 100 questions at once. "Wait a minute," she said, standing up. "If this is true, why is he here? Why is he pretending to be a defendant in a traffic case? This doesn't make any sense." Alex turned to her, his gaze steady. "Because this case isn't about a traffic violation," he said. "It's about the man sitting in the back of this courtroom." He pointed to a figure who had been quietly observing the proceedings, a man in a tailored suit, his face unreadable. The man stiffened as all eyes turned to him. "That's Victor Langston," Alex continued. "He's the CEO of Langston Industries, and he's also one of the people my parents were investigating. He's the reason I'm here today." Victor Langston stood up, his face a mask of calm, but there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes. "This is absurd," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "I don't know who this boy is or what he's trying to pull, but I won't stand here and let him slander my name." He turned to Judge Grayson. "Your Honor, I demand that this farce be stopped immediately." But Judge Grayson was no longer so quick to dismiss Alex. He looked from Langston to Alex, then to Agent Harris, his mind racing. "Mr. Langston," he said slowly, "I suggest you sit down. This is my courtroom, and I'll decide what's a farce and what's not." Langston hesitated, then sat back down, his jaw clenched. Alex took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if to steady himself. "Langston Industries isn't just a corporation," he said. "It's a front for illegal activities, money laundering, arms dealing, even human trafficking. My parents had proof, but before they could expose it, they were killed. And now Langston is trying to silence me too. That's why I'm here. I needed a way to get close to him, to force him into the open. And this case, this traffic violation, was the only way I could do it." The room was electric with tension. Margaret Hayes looked like she was about to object, but she seemed too stunned to speak. Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, his face a mixture of disbelief and dawning realization. "So let me get this straight," he said. "You orchestrated this entire case, pretended to be a defendant, represented yourself, even let me mock you, just to get Langston here? To expose him?" Alex nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, I knew he'd show up. He's been watching me, waiting for a chance to finish what he started. And now he's walked right into my trap." He turned to Langston, his eyes blazing with determination. "You thought you could scare me into silence just like you did with my parents. But you underestimated me. I'm not just a kid. I'm the one person who can bring you down." Langston's calm facade cracked, just for a moment, and a flicker of anger crossed his face. But he quickly regained his composure, leaning back in his chair with a cold smile. "This is all very dramatic," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But you have no proof, no evidence, just the wild accusations of a delusional teenager. Do you really think anyone will believe you?" Alex didn't flinch. "Oh, I have proof," he said. "Enough to bury you and everyone else involved. But I'm not going to hand it over, not yet. First, I want the world to know who you really are. And then, when you're exposed for the monster you are, I'll make sure you pay for what you've done." The room was in chaos again, voices rising as people tried to make sense of what was happening. Judge Grayson slammed his gavel repeatedly, but the noise only grew louder. Agent Harris stepped forward, his voice cutting through the din. "Everyone calm down," he shouted. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." But before anyone could respond, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open again, and a group of armed men in black tactical gear stormed in, their weapons drawn. The room erupted into screams as people ducked for cover. Alex's heart raced as he realized what was happening. Langston wasn't going to let this play out in court. He was taking matters into his own hands. "Alex Carter," one of the men shouted, his voice harsh and commanding. "Come with us or we'll take you by force." Alex's mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan. He glanced at Agent Harris, who was already moving, his hand reaching for his sidearm. But before anyone could act, Langston stood up, his face twisted into a cruel smile. "You should have stayed hidden, boy," he said. "Now you're out of time." The tension in the room was unbearable, the air thick with fear and uncertainty. Alex knew he was running out of options, but he also knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going down without a fight. As the armed men advanced, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small device, holding it up for everyone to see. "You want me?" he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Then come and get me. But I promise you, it won't end the way you think." And with that, he pressed a button on the device and the room was plunged into darkness. The last thing anyone heard was Alex's voice, calm and resolute, cutting through the chaos. "This isn't over, not even close." And then there was silence. A silence so deep it felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next.